Way out in the newly named Gulf of America stands one huge player in a campaign promise.
Drill, baby, drill.
We've flown over a lot of older rigs and platforms. These days, some of the best wells are much farther out.
This week, we take you 140 miles offshore to an oil platform called Anchor for an exclusive look at the prospects of America's renewed energy dominance.
In recent years, Bitcoin has gone up and down, but mostly up.
What's happened to the value of a Bitcoin in the past 4 years?
So Bitcoin has gone up tremendously in value.
Now the much misunderstood digital currency is moving from obscurity to a promise of security. This week, a look at the value and even the ethics of Bitcoin. Patients and medicine are both struggling to battle Lyme disease. The problem may not be the ticks, but the murky past of their use in warfare.
After World War II, our military people interviewed the Germans and the Japanese, and they found out, well, geez, they were weaponizing fleas, ticks, mosquitoes, flies.
To try to spread diseases?
Yeah, as a stealth weapon.
After a COVID leak from a biolab, what else do we not know about diseases in our midst?
Welcome to Full Measure. I'm Sharyl Attkisson. President Trump has promised to dramatically increase oil and gas production to lower energy prices and shore up national security. His first day in office, he declared an energy emergency and moved to expand offshore drilling. Today, Scott Thuman takes us on a fascinating trip way out into deep waters where he found the industry already gearing up for big changes.
Just outside of New Orleans, we board the helicopter. Our destination, 140 miles out into what's now called the Gulf of America, to one of the oil and natural gas industry's most advanced platforms. We fly south, well past a trail of rigs dotting the horizon.
Heading way out into the Gulf really helps tell the story of where this industry is going. We've flown over a lot of older rigs and platforms that are relics of earlier years when a lot of oil was found closer to shore. These days, some of the best wells are much farther out and much deeper down than you realize.
Approaching Chevron's newest platform called Anchor, we see the deep-sea drilling ship Titan that's made this groundbreaking energy field possible. This floating outpost of steel and high technology started producing just recently after years of planning and construction, a symbol of what the industry hopes is the future, backed by a president and a catchy chant.
We will drill, baby, drill.
And on Anchor, they drilled the wells deep. These pipes go down 5,000 feet to the sea floor, and then down thousands more to reach a reservoir that's as deep as 34,000 feet. That's 6.5 miles below the sea floor. Russell Benoit is Anchor's operations supervisor.
It's very complex. It takes a lot of engineering, a lot of thought, a lot of boats, a lot of vessels. A lot of things happened before this facility ever came offshore to make this viable.
It takes years of planning.
Years. Yes, many years. So I think in my history here, that almost 15, 20 years of planning behind this project and execution.
Once complete, 7 wells will be linked by pipe back to the Anchor platform, where it's all processed before another set of lines pump the product all the way back to shore, adding up to a $5.7 billion investment for America's #2 energy company. Bruce Niemeyer is Chevron's president of exploration and production for the Americas.
How important is the Gulf to you?
We've been in the Gulf of America for 85 years. We're continuing to invest today. We are increasing production 50% between last year and what we will see next year.
That's a huge number.
It is a big number. It reflects the potential and the opportunity that is there. It is there for our company, and by extension, there for the industry and for the nation.
That potential and opportunity, something President Trump plans to tap. He says he wants the U.S. to be energy dominant. In the first few days in office, he declared an energy emergency to allow his administration to take fast action to increase production, open more areas for drilling, and ramp up liquid natural gas exports.
From a President Biden to a President Trump, do you see a big difference coming?
Well, I would just point to actions. Under President Biden, in his first month in office, he issued an executive order that paused leasing of oil and gas on federal lands. In his last month, he withdrew 625 million acres of federal land from consideration in oil and gas leasing. And those things are challenging for an industry that is attempting to provide affordable and reliable energy.
In the case of this project, using new technology rated to deal with up to 20,000 pounds of pressure to tap reserves that were previously unavailable.
The 20K, that's putting us in a realm of thought on formations that we thought weren't producible at one point in time are now achievable. So that definitely changes how we look at things and prospects that we may go after.
In Anchor's Nerve Center, a small team monitors the operation. Neil Menges is in charge of large projects for Chevron.
What the team here is doing, they're controlling the wells, which are 34,000 feet deep, 5 miles away. Remotely from here, they're operating the plant that is on this facility, and then also controlling the export that heads back to the Gulf.
But what still kind of blows your mind about all of this?
I think we're really just really proud to be safely leading the industry into that next frontier of development and unlocking the resource potential of the Gulf for ourselves and for industry.
These new production platforms are not just able to reach deeper and produce at higher pressures, they're also safer these days. The crews frequently practice emergency scenarios, the equipment designed to cope with a potential disaster like that which destroyed BP's Deepwater Horizon back in 2010.
The explosion was spectacular and catastrophic. The Deepwater Horizon was under contract with BP, drilling a new well in the Gulf of Mexico.
Blast and following fire killed 11 workers. For 87 days, oil gushed from the well, over 134 million gallons, causing widespread damage to the Gulf ecology and a lasting argument for those against offshore drilling. Today, there are thousands of wells in the Gulf, accounting for 14% of our oil and 5% of our natural gas production. Texas is the biggest producing state, but there are nearly 1 million wells across the country, from California to New York, all helping to make the U.S. the biggest oil producer for the last 7 years.
I noticed earlier you said the Gulf of America. Is that a nod to President Trump?
Well, so we follow the naming convention of whatever a regulatory organization defines that. Our leaseholds in the Gulf are all federal leasehold.
Trump wants to increase the number of offshore federal leases, repealing Biden's restrictions on the Arctic and Pacific. Ultimately, it'll be independent energy companies, though, not the government, to determine if the billions in investments out here to bring down prices back on land is a worthy trade-off. The president betting they will.
140 miles out, 34,000 feet deep. Those are crazy numbers to a lot of people.
It's crazy numbers to me sometimes too. So it's very exciting and challenging and overwhelming, and it's not something you do on your own. There's a lot of smart people that help this process get to where it's at right there.
Prices went down in the first Trump term. Do you think increasing production now is going to do that again?
Well, it'll certainly help, but there is a balance between the price of oil and the willingness of oil companies to produce more. The lower the prices, the less incentive there is for them to drill new wells.
But the industry is happy, right?
For the most part, yes. Very optimistic, especially about what they call leveling of the playing field. They're talking about those taxpayer-funded incentives that in the past had been directed more at the solar and wind side of the industry. They think that's changing.
All right, thanks, Scott. Great story. Ahead on Full Measure, going big on Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the first decentralized universal digital currency that lets you buy things without banks or credit cards. Some see Bitcoin primarily as an investment of stored value, kind of like a company's stock. Others believe it's on its way to becoming a dominant form of currency with no financial intermediaries. Is it finding a new place of importance in today's global economy? Today we get some insight in a rare interview with professional investor Jeffrey Wernick, who has gone big on Bitcoin, calling it an ethical investment. Why do you think Bitcoin is an ethical investment?
I think Bitcoin is ethical in the sense it has a well-defined rules, and those rules are immutable. So you can't buy influence. So what could be more ethical than an uncorruptible protocol? And people trust the protocol to keep lying out of the protocol through the process under which a Bitcoin is created. So it's a completely honest ledger, and nobody doubts the integrity of that ledger. You don't need to hire third-party auditors to validate that ledger. So what's more ethical than something that you have a store that people can exchange value without having to ask permission, doing a transaction on a mutual voluntary basis that can't be censored, there's no lying involved, the transaction's recorded real time, the whole world can observe the transaction without knowing the identity of the parties engaging in the transaction. So what could be more ethical than two mutually consenting parties agreeing to do a transaction and leaving a public record of that transaction, and knowing that public record is an honest, truthful recognition of that transaction.
Bitcoin was created in 2008 by an anonymous inventor calling himself or itself Satoshi Nakamoto, either a person or a composite, nobody really knows. The complex way it works, people or companies create or mine Bitcoins, they're called miners, by using a computerized device to solve a mathematical problem that also results in verifying transactions of people buying Bitcoin, recorded in an uncorruptible ledger. Further explained in a popular internet video.
Bitcoins are digital coins you can send through the internet. Compared to other alternatives, Bitcoins have a number of advantages. Bitcoins are transferred directly from person to person via the net, without going through a bank or clearinghouse. This means that the fees are much lower. You can use them in every country. Your account cannot be frozen, and there are no prerequisites or arbitrary limits.
What's happened to the value of a Bitcoin in the past 4 years?
So Bitcoin has gone up tremendously in value.
Since we first reported on Bitcoin in 2020, the value of one coin has gone from about $4,800 to a recent high of more than $103,000. That means a $1,000 investment then would be worth $21,460 at the recent peak.
There's always temptation these days for government to get involved in things, and there's talk about them somehow getting involved in regulating Bitcoin. What should we look out for on the landscape, do you think, in the coming decade?
There are regulatory threats, but the regulatory threat is not to Bitcoin in and of itself. It's to those who make part of the ecosystem, how they could regulate them. So they could regulate miners by defining miners as financial intermediaries and bring them under the control of OCC or some other entity, or they could create some new entity to do that, and they could regulate who's permitted to, that you're not allowed to self-custody, so therefore they can track all the movement. So,
is there a risk that's going to happen, you think?
I think there's a great risk that's going to happen.
If the government were to take a hostile act, as you say, against Bitcoin, would that impact people who have Bitcoin in terms of make the value of their Bitcoin fall?
I think hostile actions are actions that occurred from a sense of weakness, not of strength. But ultimately, unless the U.S. embraces monetary or fiscal responsibility, the dollar will collapse and something will replace it. And more and more people will like Bitcoin, and also the more and more people that hold Bitcoin, the harder it becomes for them to take hostile action against Bitcoin. So I assume that the type of people that own a lot of Bitcoin, if the government becomes too restrictive, they'll move out of the United States. The mining will move out of the United States, and the owners will move out of the United States, and there'll be other countries that are hostile to the United States or neutral to the United States, or don't necessarily dislike the United States, but don't like dollar hegemony, that'll sit back and say, we welcome you.
Lastly, for ordinary Americans who still don't know much about this universe, what would you advise them if they were saying, what do you think I ought to do?
Well, last time you asked me this question, my answer is, I think Bitcoin, people should always expect Bitcoin will be highly volatile. So one is first is no one should invest in money they can't afford to lose. Somebody else has to determine their own preferences for risk and own tolerance for risk. So if they feel compelled to look at the price every day, and then when they see a 10%, 20% move, if that's going to give them a heart attack, then they shouldn't own it. But as long as they feel that they have the stomach for some level of risk, can absorb, some losses, and just can be patient and know that over time they will be more than fairly compensated for that risk, everybody should own, some Bitcoin.
In 2021, El Salvador became the first and so far the only country to officially adopt Bitcoin or any crypto asset as legal tender and a national currency. Coming up on Full Measure, the government's history of using ticks carrying disease as a weapon. There's an epidemic of tick-transmitted Lyme disease, with some estimates putting the number of people diagnosed and treated in the U.S. at 476,000 people a year, according to the CDC. But there's ongoing controversy, with many saying the medical establishment too often refuses to recognize the illness. When science writer Chris Newby got deathly ill after a tick bite, her research led her to uncover shocking facts about America's history of weaponizing parasites.
I used to do ballet.
She just went downhill very fast.
I went from being a gifted athlete to there's times when it's hard to put a shirt on.
It just doesn't seem possible that this poppy seed-sized thing is going to make you bedridden, possibly for the rest of your life.
This is a story of the history of the tick weaponization program in the U.S. and the government's involvement in that and the cover-up and how it's related to Lyme disease.
Can you summarize what you discovered about the U.S. government's work? Were they using ticks somehow in their research?
Yes. So after World War II, our military people interviewed the Germans and the Japanese, and they found out, well, geez, they were weaponizing fleas, ticks, and mosquitoes, flies.
To try to spread diseases?
Yeah, as a stealth weapon. So if there's a country you want to weaken and disable, you would put these bioweapons, these unnatural germs, and carried by insects. It's a stealth weapon. It would weaken the population. It would tie up medical resources. Then it would be easier to go in and invade the country.
Are you suggesting the U.S., there's evidence the U.S. started doing similar research?
Yeah, we took like Himmler's good ideas and General Ishi's good ideas and supersized them. So the main subject of my book, Willy Burgdorfer, was brought over from Switzerland because he was an expert on Q fever, a biological weapon of choice during World War II. He flew over the biological weapons program in Fort Detrick, Maryland, gave him assignments, he would research things. His first job was mosquitoes, so he put a deadly strain of Trinidad fever virus into the mosquitoes. And then fleas, they put plague in fleas. And he was trying to package the fleas in little tubes and then put them in cluster bombs, so you could drop these cluster bombs and it would spread infected fleas over a battalion-sized area. And then ticks. So his specialty in Switzerland were soft ticks from Africa and relapsing fever bacterium. It's related to the Lyme spirochete. And so he would take ticks and inject them with mixes of bacteria and virus, put them on little animals, and the goal was to create virulent strains that nature had never seen before. So then those ticks could be weaponized and dropped on our enemies.
So how did Lyme disease factor into what you learned about our experiments back then?
Well, I never could find proof that the Lyme disease bacterium, named after its discoverer, Borrelia burgdorferi, had been weaponized. But what I did discover is that there were several tick-borne diseases that they weaponized. First was Rocky Mountain spotted fever, which is the most deadly tick-borne disease in the U.S. There's tularemia, which is also called rabbit fever, and then there's Q fever, and so those are the ones, the main go-to bioweapons.
What do you think you learned, taught us, or if anything, about what happened with COVID? Are there any parallels or lessons when you look at the two?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of parallels. I often say that the Lyme disease outbreak is a prequel to what happened with COVID. So you have people messing with nature, engineering their genomes, and first of all, there was not really good oversight. A lot of these programs, for example, I found someone who said he dropped infected ticks on Cuba in 1962 to try to destroy Cuba's sugar crop. So those are all dark budgets. Dark budgets need to know very little is in writing. So we need more transparency. Shine the light on what happened with COVID, what happened with Lyme disease.
There's Lyme disease everywhere.
It's more prevalent than AIDS.
How many more people are going to suffer before the truth comes out?
As citizens, we ought to be astonished and alarmed.
The major medical journals have published that chronic Lyme disease is not real and it's a psychosomatic condition.
Newbie says if you can find a tick that bit you, you can save it in a plastic baggie with a damp paper towel, send it to a lab that will test it for everything, not just Lyme. She adds that early treatment with antibiotics can be a lifesaver for numerous tick pathogens that could make you very sick. After a break, what's ahead next week on Full Measure? Coming up next week on Full Measure, we investigate a startling sea change in medical ethics that you probably haven't heard about.
What you're doing when you say, I think that the risk of what I'm going to do to your body is so minimal that you have no say over it because I want to make more money at the market or get my product to market faster, is you're commoditizing that risk.
How Congress and America's public health agencies quietly changed the rules for conducting experiments on people, next week on Full Measure. Until next time, we'll be searching for more stories that hold powers accountable. Thanks for watching.